Welcome to the Defence Property Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things property investing and real estate for Australian Defence Force personnel. Whether you're looking to build and scale a property portfolio or relocating across Australia, we've got the insights and tips for less stress and more success. Let's dive in.
The information in this episode is general in nature and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. Nothing discussed should be considered financial, legal, or taxation advice. Before making any decisions, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for your circumstances and seek independent, professional advice from a licensed financial advisor.
And welcome back to the Defence Property Podcast. Your host, Kane Drury from Discover Buyers Agency. Today we're talking about probably one of the more common questions that I get is, how do I get started, or my unique situation and what's the best move for me to make? So we've got a few property scenarios or client profile scenarios that we can talk through that are probably some of the more common people that I speak to these days. And then hopefully one of them resonate with you and you can sort of understand what a pathway might be for yourself. So the first client profile that we'll go through is the supercharged rent vestor. So this is the current serving soldier, sailor, airman. They've probably been in the defence a shorter period of time. And, their typical savings might be they're just starting $5K, $10K up to, the $25, $45, $50, $60,000, depending how long they've been saving. And essentially the supercharged rent vesting strategy is whenever we're in defence, we want to create this situation where we're double dipping our two cash flow entitlements. So of the defence entitlements, we've got rent assistance, which is a weekly subsidy towards the rent that we're paying, and then DHOAS, which is our monthly loan subsidy for a property that we've purchased that we live in. And then we've got HPAS, which is a one-off transactional, and HPC, which is a transactional on event. So we want to create a long period of time. If our career is 20 years, ideally 20 years where we can claim both DHOAS and rent assistance, and we've got to strategize a little bit. I'll give a very simple example before we get into the supercharged rent vestor. If someone serves for 20 years and they buy a property that they live in at year 2, so the first 2 years they obviously got living in accommodation or rent assistance or DHA, and then they buy a property, they get DHOAS and they live in it for 18 years and then they discharge. So they got 20 years of entitlement, 18 DHOAS, 2 years rent assistance. If a same person then strategized that out a little bit and said, well, I'm going to rent vest the whole way through my career, and instead of buying an own occupier at the 2-year mark, they buy a investment property. They rent all the way through to 20 years and they claim rent assistance for that full 20 years. Then when they discharge, they buy their own occupier. They've got 18 years of DHOAS owing to them that they can use for that own occupier property. So out of a 20-year career, they got 38 years of entitlements. Whereas the first person only got 20. So they've double dipped their entitlements essentially. The supercharged rent vestor is going to do something similar in an attempt to double dip. However, they haven't got enough capital to go straight into an investment. With an investment property, we generally got higher deposit, higher lender's mortgage insurance and stamp duty with no concessions. So the government's not in the business of helping us buy investment properties. So you got to pay the whole way yourself. So the supercharged rent vestor gets posted maybe to someone like Townsville or Wagga Wagga. They're going to use DHOAS, they're going to use HPAS, and they're going to use the first home guarantee scheme, which is a civilian entitlement. And they purchase their property using 5% deposit under the first home guarantee scheme with no lender's mortgage insurance. And if they keep the property under the certain threshold for that relevant state, they won't have to pay any stamp duty. And they're in the market for a much lower deposit. But then the goal becomes get posted away so we can go back to an area or a different locality where we can claim our rent assistance and we're getting our DHOAS on our investment property and we're supercharging our rent vesting strategy. So the pros of this, we can obviously double dip our cash flow entitlements. There's a lower barrier of entry from our savings. The cons of the strategy, you're at the mercy of the local market. So if you're posted to an area that's already seen the vast majority of its growth cycle, you could be buying at the top of that market. So you just got to be aware of the market that you're buying in and that, but ultimately it's a way to get started sooner. The next is our own occupier. Much like the supercharger rent investor, they stack all their entitlements, as many as they can, into their first purchase. They buy their own occupier, but then they're just going to use HPAS through their posting cycle and buy, sell when they leave the locality, buy in the new locality, and so on following that. This is probably a least common strategy that we see. And because we're only ever capitalizing on DHOAS and we're missing out on rent assistance, and rent assistance is generally worth more than our DHOAS subsidy. So this is why we don't see it too often. The next is the deliberate rent investor. So this is someone that's probably got more cash on hand and in savings than the supercharged rent investor, and they don't need to go through the buying their own occupier to use their DHOAS, HPAS and everything to get it into the market. Because that supercharged rent investor, for that one period where they're posted in that locality living in that property, they're not receiving rent assistance. So if that's a 3-year posting, before they can get posted away, they're missing out on that double opportunity. Whereas the deliberate investor is posted to Brisbane, Townsville. They buy an investment property in a completely different region. They're getting rent assistance where they're posted. They've got their investment property and they can use market data and research to pick an area that's going to be early in its cycle to get good growth. And then later in life, their delayed gratification, they use their DHOAS later when they buy their own occupier. So they're very deliberately becoming a rent investor, letting Defence subsidise their rent, and they're just building their portfolio using, known sound strategies to build their portfolio. So the pros of the deliberate rent investor, they've got data available to them. They can pick markets in their earlier stages of their growth cycle. They can buy Australia-wide. They can follow sound investment principles, building a portfolio, considering purchasing in other entities and stuff. The cons to it, there's a higher barrier of entry. So generally you're going to pay full freight on your stamp duty and your lender's mortgage insurance. And they're making the deliberate decision to delay buying their own occupier. Then we've got the delayed investor, I guess. And this is another common one. Someone that's purchased their property, they might have been posted to one locality and done multiple back-to-back postings. And they've purchased a property quite a few years ago. They've used DHOAS. They're reducing their debt and they've got a fair bit of equity in the property. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we want to start building wealth outside of the family home. So they make the decision to invest, but it's delayed through, delaying that decision to go down the investment path. And then all of a sudden they're like, they've had this decision or this moment that's caused the interest in going down the investor path. So they're quite equity rich and they can just go buy an investment property in another area. I guess the pro to this strategy is that because they're equity rich, they can aggressively build their portfolio. They can use data and pick markets Australia-wide, buy really quality assets, combine different strategies, whether they're chasing tax minimisation, capital growth, cash flow. Because they've got a lot of equity available to them, they can actually stack a few different strategies and accelerate the portfolio building. But the biggest con to these guys is because they've been in the defence a little bit longer. They've owned their home for a while, hence they've built up that equity position. They've probably got less time or runway to building their portfolio. So they generally have to be a little bit more aggressive in that building phase. Another common client profile we see is the veteran who's been through the DVA process and put all their claims in. They could be sitting on, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 plus points. They've had a large lump sum payout and they're going to put that towards property. So, they can again be in a good equity cash position to build their portfolio. But the biggest con on these guys is they might not be working yet. They might not be, ready to start investing, and they might not have the knowledge to build a property portfolio. And unfortunately, some people do blow those DVA payouts. So it's really important to get educated and make sure that, that once in a lifetime opportunity is put to good use, whether it's through traditional financial advice, buying investment properties, buying a home, just putting it to a good quality asset and not just spending it on those trips to Bali and sort of material assets that aren't going to appreciate in value. And then another really common profile that we see is the career-driven professional. So they've joined defence, 18, 20, 22, 4, however old. They've served their ROSO plus a few years, maybe done 4 to 8 years, but they're driven by their career. So it could be a RAMI tradie that's discharged to go to the mines, or even a non-RAMI personnel that's going to the mines in some sort of other role, like a non-trade role. It could be our officers, engineers, people that are driven by their career to go chase a civilian career where they can sort of earn more money than they could otherwise in defence. So a very good pro for this profile is, they're driven by their career, which means they're potentially going to continue increasing their income. And the more income they've got available, the more, I guess, they can build and scale their portfolio. A con to this profile is they're very time poor people, so they could be exposed to higher elements of opportunity cost, sitting on the sidelines, so focused on the career that they don't actually go down that investing path. So there you have it. 6 profiles, hopefully one of them resonates. If you want to jump on a call and discuss your current situation and profile and what a pathway that may be best suited to you, reach out on the website www.discoverbuyersagency.com.au and happy to book in for a free strategy call and see where your best direction might take you. Sweet. Thanks for listening. Until next week, jump on the Defence Property Podcast.